Hey everybody, I am doing a book review, so hopefully that's why you're on here. This is a book by Artur Pawlowski, and I had the opportunity to meet him. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. I'm going to tell you about his book that I just finished reading, and I'm hoping that this inspires some of you in a variety of different ways, which I will run through. So I'm going to try and do this as fast as possible, but and I will put the link to get this book, Lions Do Not Bow by Arturo Pawlowski. And I could be messing up his name there. I did have the honor of meeting him and listening to him. Might tell you a funny story about that, but we'll see if we have time for it. But let me just jump into the book review. It's a pretty thick book, hardback. I don't remember how much it was. I think it was like $30, but I would strongly recommend you get the book, just even if nothing else, to have it on your bookshelf, or go to his website and make a donation, because you're going to be surprised what this guy went through. This is the guy who's the Canadian pastor who basically ran, I don't think it was the police, but it was like security personnel out of his church and was basically yelling at him, "Get out, get out." He would just not have any discussion with him. And reading his story, this is a thick book, 300 and some pages, I think. And I did read the whole thing, and it was, 493 pages. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it here fairly briefly. But because of the nature of the book, I am going to tell you a little bit about Artur Pawlowski, and because I think it's important. He was born in 1973, which means he's younger than me. Man, I feel like I'm getting old here. He spent his teen years in Poland, I think about his first 17 years. And then he went to Greece for maybe 5 years, if I remember right. I was reading something about that. And then to Canada, in Alberta, where he resided for about 10 years before he became a citizen. And I think he's been in Canada for about 30 years now. He's married to Marzina. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I think they've been married for a long time, decades. He is a pastor. He's a street preacher. He has a ministry that feeds the poor in Alberta, Canada. And he was once I don't know if he's elected or appointed Alberta chaplain, the chaplain for the province of Alberta. He is a civil rights protester, which is really a lot of what this book is about. And he once ran for Parliament in Canada, which is very much like our Congress here in the U.S. He has had 120 court cases against him, even in the midst of him not breaking a single law. He has had 340 citations, which is our version of tickets, which could be for traffic violations or could be for civil unrest or, lots of things. Again, he did not break the law. And he's been imprisoned 20 times. And I think the most lengthy stay he had at his local community college was 51 days, if I remember right. So what did he do to get this? He preached the gospel, number one. He encouraged people, and he taught people about their rights. That's what he did. He spoke out, and he lived well within his civil rights, which are very similar in Canada. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, because some of the things that came to question for me as I read through the book was, well, what are the rights of Canadians and how do they differ from Americans? And so I'll tell you just briefly about that. I'll also say that in the back of the book, he has the text from a speech that he delivered at Mar-a-Lago, and it was powerful. I felt like I was there just listening to it. One thing that's kind of cool about reading books from people that you've met is you get the personalization of them reading it to you, because as you read it, you hear their voice. And so I have heard his voice. I've actually spoken at the same event as him. I was an opening act. He was the star of the show, and it went late into the night. It was really it's funny because we're so we're just so weak here in America. I feel like in modern day, we have this amazing guy who could literally I would argue that he could probably speak on topics that we would all find quite fascinating and interesting in storytelling for in excess of 20 hours. Let's say, I think he could speak for a whole day. And we were at this event in Yakima, and he didn't even get up until, I want to say it was like 9 o'clock. Okay. And there's a lot of old people there like me and even older, right? We go to bed. So, we go to bed early, right? And Yakima's an hour away. So, and I wasn't really so excited about it as much as I was. There was some older people there. I was like, oh my gosh, it's getting really late. Well, he got up and he said that he had 5 hours worth of content that he wanted to present. And I'm thinking it's 9. Let's see, my math, that's late. So he said he would carve it down to 3 hours or something like that. And maybe he got up at 8. I can't remember. But anyways, we thought he was kidding, right? And I think he said, maybe I'll carve it down to 2 hours. Because I remember, and he's a fascinating speaker, great presenter, lots of amazing stories, incredible faith in God, and just a strong relationship with the Lord Jesus. And he literally spoke until after it was like 11:15 or something by the time. And really, that was just his introduction. He was just getting warmed up. And so that was my first time actually physically being with him. So anyway, great book. I ordered it. It was not available at the time, but they did mention it that night, and so I ordered the book, and it came. And I love reading books. I don't read as many hard copies now as I used to because of Audible. I would say it's probably 2/3, 1/3. So I listen to a lot of books. I'm listening to a book on it's an economist book about Austrian economist, and like 200-300 years, economic concepts and things. Is quite interesting. I often listen to books on, I have another one going right now on Robert's Rules of Order because they're so confusing and it just takes forever to learn them. I do a lot of Hillsdale College classes that are not books, but they're classes that are online that I listen to. And then I read, usually I'm almost always read my Bible in the morning. I have kind of a routine in the morning that I read, and pray and just, trust God for the day. And then usually, towards the end of the day, it's like, look, we all want to stay up late and watch a movie or do something, but I try to I look forward to reading. And so I try to dive into that. So anyway, 493 pages, amazing. It didn't feel like that long. Now it is pretty big print. I will say, and this is not a criticism, okay? The book is not incredibly well written in terms of grammar or just like refined, right? Like I'm not an amazing writer either, but this is also it's a story. It's a biography sort of about some experience. It's kind of like a walk in someone else's shoes for a period of time. And so I think that he probably wrote it himself. And, also he's a Canadian, so I always make fun of Canadians, their language it's slight, but it is a little different than English, the U.S. English. And then his native language is Polish. But anyways, it's a great book. It's just not, it's not written at like a college level or something like that. That's all I'm saying. I'm not. When I was in college and I took a writing class, I remember one of the things that they taught us was that you write just mind dump, right? It helps you from having writer's block. But then you go through your writing and immediately delete 50%. And then you go through and read it again and you delete another 30%. And now you're down to just the core message without a bunch of extra words and stuff. So, but anyways, easy read is my point with that. It's not difficult to understand. And it was quite entertaining, although it was very discouraging, which I'll tell you about some of his experiences here. I'm not going to read the book for you, but I do want to tell you enough about it to entice you to at least read it yourself. And there is some pictures in it too. So I found it kind of interesting in the premise of the whole thing. I looked up Artur on Wikipedia, just looking for some information about him. That's where I got his information on where he was born and how long he lived there and stuff. I'm assuming that's right. But it's under what he's known for. This has cracked me up. It says defiance of COVID-19 public health rules. And in here in my notes, I underlined, double underlined, and parenthesized rules. Defiance of the rules. Darn it, Artur, you are defiant of the rules. And so we're going to put you in jail. Wait a second. Since when is a rule a law that I can have punitive punishment for? It also said that he speaks anti-abortion rhetoric as well as anti-homosexual rhetoric. Let's go. Let's see. One of the quotes that he likes that I thought was interesting. It says, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil." This is by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. I'll say one thing with that. In other words, it's saying, look, if you stand by while you're videotaping a heinous act that somebody's committing instead of doing something, you're basically participating in that act. Let somebody else run their video camera, especially if you're a man. Like, stand up and do something. But the truth is, for all of us, we have this cool thing called a mouth that has words that come out of it. And when we learn what our rights are, our natural rights, our civil rights, and we understand what our Constitution is, we have this ability to stand up for ourselves and to teach others and to speak and to protect others as a result of that. And so let's see. In one of the opening pages here, I said the title is Lions Do Not Bow, but one of the opening pages here, he says, "A lion does not concern himself with the opinions of the sheep, and lions do not bow to hyenas." We stand up, we fight, we do what's right. Now, the majority of the book does go through his experiences of being arrested multiple times, being pursued, being surveilled, being tracked, being harassed by police. The story of the video of the police coming into his church, I think it was on an Easter service or something. They had a rule that you could not gather. Somehow, pot shops and abortion clinics and hardware stores and big box stores are somehow, what was the term that they used? And not priority. I know you guys are all saying it. It was like they were important, but other things weren't important. And so, of course, church is important. Goodness sakes. And so they came into the church, and he obviously ran them off, and he did that multiple times. The center of the book, I'll just show you real quick here. He's got a bunch of really good photos and quite the story of some of the things that he's done and people that he's met. If there's three things that I really want you to take away from this book, it would be these. Number one, our justice system is broken. And we've seen that in America, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about the difference between Canada and America here in a minute, but I just want you to know that. Number one, the justice system is broken. Number two, and let me just say this: I'm not doing this or saying this because I just want you to be entertained. I want you to be compelled, as I am and as I have been for years, to stand up and to use your voice. And that protects people. That is a form of protection. And not only that, but even if we're wrong, it's our right to speak. We have the right to speak up. And when we have a thing like our justice system, we have three branches of government in America. We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Our judicial branch has been weaponized and used against us, not just here in America, but also in Canada. And it's our responsibility. I'm going to read a little section out of the Declaration of Independence later when I talk about the Canadian system that I really want you to hear. It is our right. It's not just our right, but it's our responsibility. And if for no other reason, think about, for America, 248 years of independence. And there is a lot of people, millions of people who've gone before us, who've not only given their lives and their sacred honor to defend our natural rights, but we owe it to them, and we owe it to those who come behind us to protect what we have here in America, what God's given us here in America. So the justice system is broken. Number two is our natural rights and our civil rights violations. They're egregious, and we cannot not do something about that. We can't sit by idle. And I would say one of the biggest things that we can do and should do is we ought to help educate other people as to what their rights are. A lot of people have never read the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, and they don't really understand what their natural rights are and how they are bestowed on them. They don't understand the social compact and what they ought to be, how they ought to be looking at their lives. The other one that kind of, the third thing that I want to say is really important to me is our prison system is screwed up. I mean, it is really bad. And it's similar in Canada with what Artur experienced. And it's not really about correction or reform. But it could be. We could be reforming people, reforming them, helping them to see how God made them, not how the world wanted to manipulate them. It could transform people. It could transform lives. It could help heal people, but it's not. It could train people. It could give people the tools they need to be successful, not just an occupation, but an understanding of who they are and whose they are by virtue of who God made us to be. And ultimately, I think that our correction facilities, they could give hope. They could give a lot more hope. And I would like to see that. I'm excited to see that. The next section here is probably the most powerful section in the book for me. And it was chapter 24, day 47. And I'm going to go for just like 30 seconds here. I got to grab something. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I printed some stuff that I wanted to look at, and I forgot to grab it off the printer before I started this. So when you get the book, you'll get to chapter 24, page 422. And in this chapter, he's talking about possible light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but I just want to read basically one page of this, what he wrote, because this is so powerful, not just for his situation and his story, but it's so powerful for us in terms of where we're at in America. Gosh, I'm in such a hurry today. I didn't turn my light on there. You can actually see me now. Sorry. Okay. In this, he's talking about Joseph. Joseph was sold out by his brothers, and he became Pharaoh's chief cupbearer. Or no, he became, later on, he became, I think he was second in command to the Pharaoh as a result of what he did, but he had a conversation with his chief cupbearer, and he recites that here. So this is what Artur wrote. It says, Joseph's story was fascinating also because it led this man to the end of himself. When he was in jail, he was still waiting for men to help him. He said that Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, please remember me and do me a favor when things go well with you. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I am here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. He goes on to say that this is Artur writing. He said, you see, humans have a tendency to seek help from other people or things. Perhaps we will find it in wealth or power. However, God wants to bring us to the end of ourselves. We must go to our knees and say, God, if not you, then no one. If not you, God, if not you, then no one. If you will not come to the rescue, then I am as good as dead. That was basically a quote. He's saying that's what it's like for us to kind of get to the end of ourselves. Joseph, like so many of us, was holding on to the earthly methods and didn't blame him, and I didn't blame him at all. I have also done that many times. Pharaoh's official had forgotten about Joseph. He moved on with his life. Joseph was just a memory from the past. Like many others, people today are hoping to leave behind the events of the past few years. Joseph was just an unpleasant memory. Unfortunately, that's our nature. When things go sour, we look for others' company and we seek God. When the hardship passes, we forget. Since it no longer has an impact on us, it is no longer our concern. Human nature is so predictable and so selfish. 2 years later, abandoned and forgotten, Joseph was ready to die if need be. Then Pharaoh had a dream and no one could interpret it. No one had the answers. Then the chief cupbearer remembered the Hebrew slave who was a prisoner who had God on his side. Finally, Joseph stood before the king, and you know the rest of the story. But this is something that Joseph said when he stood before Pharaoh. He said, "It is beyond my power to interpret the dreams, but God can tell you what it means." This is amazing because he was standing in front of arguably the most powerful human being on the planet, who some worshipped as a god, and he was telling him that you are not the most powerful. There is a God that is more powerful than you. And that took some serious guts for Joseph to say that. You know the rest of the story. Joseph ended up being honored by Pharaoh and trusted by him and given tremendous responsibility. But I cannot say strongly enough how much this paragraph impacted me when I was reading this. And sometimes you're reading stuff and you sort of buzz through, and then you're like, oh my goodness, this is really good here. And just this idea that, in times of struggle, we turn to each other, which I don't think Artur is saying that we shouldn't. But ultimately, we ought to trust God and be seeking God. I think a lot of times, if you read the book of James, you could summarize the entire book of James by simply saying, pray and act. God calls us to pray. He calls us to action. And too many today are so comfortable in our lifestyle, a comfortable lifestyle that we live, that we rarely pray and we almost never act. And that's true for the majority of people. And it's really sad, because those are the things that we ought to be doing relentlessly. So when times are tough, we turn to God and we turn to others. And when the times get better, we sort of just go on about life and we forget about everything. We can't do that. Not only can we not do that right now, but we can't really do that ever. We've got to always stay yoked to God, be seeking the Lord on a daily basis. Lord, what is it that you want for me today? What is it that I can be doing for you and for the kingdom of God? But specifically with regards to what's happened the last few years, there has been this tremendous overreach and just trampling of our rights, and we cannot forget that. So let me explain how this ties in. So when I went back, Canada has what's called a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and you can look this up online, and it is not unbelievably dissimilar to our Bill of Rights in our U.S. Constitution, which the Bill of Rights actually started as 16 line items, and then it was reduced down to, that was in the Senate, then it was reduced to 12 in the House, and then those were sent out to the states for ratification, and initially only 10 of them were ratified. So those 10, the first 10 amendments to our Constitution are the Bill of Rights. Interestingly enough, 203 years later, the 27th Amendment, which was actually supposed to be the 12th Amendment originally, was ratified. Because the way the ratification process works is you have to have, I think it's 2/3 of the states have to ratify amendments to the Constitution in order for them to become official. Well, those two, the 11th and 12th, on the original list didn't get ratified. The 11th never did, and the 12th, it took 203 years so for enough states to sign off on it. So Canada became self-governing in 1867, precisely 100 years before the U.S. started building some amazing cars in the 60s. But they weren't fully free or independent. It took actually another, it was about 50, 60 years before the UK acknowledged Canada as autonomous. And then the Canada Act wasn't actually passed until 1982. So so I mean that's pretty amazing. 1982. I mean that's during our lifetimes for a lot of us old people. And that basically was the start of, my understanding is that's kind of the start of the Canadian, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is what I showed you earlier, which they consider to be their constitution. And they celebrate that freedom now as Canada Day, which is July 1st, which is very similar to our Independence Day on July 4th. And just of note, you know that, and that several, we have similar rights. One difference that Canada does not have is the Second Amendment. Their citizens are not allowed to have guns, but they do have freedom of speech and press, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of travel, similar to what we have, interstate travel, so we can travel between states freely, and due process. If you read our Bill of Rights, half of them have to do with the treatment of prisoners, because tyrannical governments use the threat, or they try to use the legal system to imprison innocent people. So if you look at, certainly the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth, Seventh, Eighth Amendments, they all have to do with the treatment of prisoners. Why? Because, and you have to kind of ask yourself this, like, why were the framers and founders of a country so worried about how you would treat prisoners? Well, the reason is that they understood that tyrants will try to imprison innocent people. Back to the story of Joseph, right? Joseph gets imprisoned, Artur gets imprisoned, January 6th, people get imprisoned. I was in DC on January 6th. How I didn't get arrested, I have no idea, but I didn't. And a lot of innocent people were arrested throughout time, and so that's very common. And so they put these protections in there, things like due process, things like a speedy trial, things like a reasonable a judgment against a person if they're found guilty, things like the right to a trial by jury, or things like that, the right to like in our Fifth Amendment, we have a clause in there that basically says you cannot be tried more than once for the same crime. So if you're found not guilty, they can't just go back and rehash it and figure out what they need to do to make you guilty. It's called double jeopardy. And so they also have the right to privacy, the right to attorneys, free, speedy trial, the right to trial by jury in certain cases and things like that. So very similar. As I read through the book, that was one of the things that sort of came to mind for me, was like, well, what rights do Canadians have? And so they are very similar to ours. Now, let me read something to you out of our Declaration of Independence. This is quite interesting. It says, "Prudence indeed will dictate the governments long established should not be changed in light of transient causes." Now, before you go to sleep, because that sounds like Old English, let me explain what that says. It says that it wouldn't be prudent to change a government because of some the latest fad. There's a fad right now with some people thinking that they can change their gender. So it wouldn't be prudent to change the Constitution for people who are mentally ill during this time. Nothing new under the sun. It goes on to say, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while the evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. What does that say? Well, what it's saying is that based on the history of what we know about men, and just talking about mankind, men and women, they will put up with suffering to the extent that it is sufferable, that it's not such a big deal. It comes on slowly. It doesn't hurt too bad. We'll put up with it. It's easier to put up with it than to go through the effort of abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. In other words, getting off your butt, turning the TV off, getting off of your screens, and doing something about it. And so it's easier to do nothing and to suffer a little, have a little pain, than to do something about it. But then it goes on to say, but then it says, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evidences a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, that's a mouthful, but basically what it's saying is that when the tyranny becomes insufferable, it is not only your right, but it's your duty to stand off and throw off the bonds of the tyrannical government and to provide a new government or new guards that will ensure your future security. Now, I quote that a lot because that particular part of the Declaration of Independence really caught my eye a few years ago. And basically what our framers did was they went from there and they said that essentially they were describing themselves. They're like saying, okay, look, we've put up with this for a long time. It's now insufferable. We're standing up. We're doing something about it. And by the way, we're declaring our independence. And they sent the Declaration of Independence across the Atlantic Ocean to the UK, to the king, of England, and I can only imagine what sort of laughter the Declaration of Independence got in the courts of England. But then they go on to list the areas that he is violating them and that he is tyrannical against them. And so praise God for our framers to have the guts and the wherewithal and the human psychology to understand what it was that needed to happen in those times. So strongly encourage you to get why is that not focused? It's focused on my face. Lions Do Not Bow by Artur Pawlowski. Great man of God. Really good book. And I would encourage you to get it, again, not just because it's enlightening and encouraging, and I think you'll be inspired to want to be a part of the movement to make things better, to encourage people. But he deserves our support. This is a man of God who has given his life for service to Jesus and to encouraging people. So God bless you. Thank you for watching. And I think I'm going to do more book reports. I like doing them. I love reading, and hopefully you like it too. So God bless you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.